How do you rebuild after church hurt? That is my question today. And it's a personal experience that I have had not once, but un deux, twice in French. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, what am I going to do for my video today? And immediately came to mind was this most recent experience with a church that I had been attending where I met my husband. And it it was not good. How it ended was not good. And ironically enough, I woke up, fell back asleep. I woke up, checked my Instagram, and one of my friends had sent me a message. She had watched one of my other videos and was like, "Hey, if you want a guest speaker to talk more about church hurt, let me know." And I was like, "Okay, God, you woke me up, put that thought in my mind." And then my friend brought it up again. So, what a perfect time, because this is something that many of us have gone through. Let me just pick my nose or itch it or whatever this is. Um, Many of us have gone through this, and some have experienced, severe religious trauma. Other describe it as church hurt. But I want to vulnerably walk you through my story, and I want to take you through my experience, as well as encourage you to reframe um, what happened for you, so that you might give your relationship with God, and that's it, period, your relationship with God, a second chance or a third chance or a fourth chance. So, as I get into this, I know that this is a very hot topic. I know that this is a very triggering topic. So, if you feel like you are not in a place to receive this information, then this may not be for you. If you feel like you're in a place where you're open to this information, then this is for you. I am not going to sit here and shame you, pressure you, or push you. I'm literally going to tell you my story and what I learned. And I feel like my story is very powerful. And I know that what I learned is transferable to anyone who has an open mind about their desire to have a relationship with God. So, um, when I had experienced my first kind of church hurt, I was in college, and I was doing the things that college students do. Once you leave a town of 5,000 people where you grew up on a 75-acre farm and you aren't exposed to much, and then you like get out into Southern California and you're, 30 minutes from the beach and 40 minutes from LA, and you're on your own and independent and you're working and you have money and you have all this freedom. What else would you do? So I did all the things. I was going to parties, I was drinking, I was having sex, like I was doing all the stuff. Um, and I experienced a lot of religious shaming from my brother, from my parents. Things like, we're just afraid that you're going to hell for all the choices that you're making, um, that this isn't who I am. There's all of these things that were really spoken over me and put on me by my family. And I felt very judged instead of shepherded and encouraged. I felt very ostracized because of these choices I was making, when I felt like I was just being a teenager who was exploring. Now, were all these choices safe? No, of course not. Were all these choices the best for me? Probably not. But at that moment, I didn't need fear based faith shoved down my throat. I didn't need um, people telling me what God was going to do to me. I just needed encouragement, and I needed an open ear, and I needed love, so that I could learn from my choices, instead of what happened, which was the more that you told me that I was doing something bad, I was going to rebel more through it to like prove a point that I didn't care. Now, I was raised, and I shared this in another video, I was raised in a Nazarene church. I grew up going to church every Sunday night, to youth group on Wednesday. I used to travel around the Northwest and talk about how I found God and who Jesus is in my life. And so I was pretty much like, you know, how Mormons go around and are on mission trips. That's what I did for teenagers and youth groups. I shared about my relationship with Jesus. But what I realized was that as I got older, this relationship wasn't really my relationship. It's what I knew about God and what I knew I was supposed to be doing, because there was kind of like this performance based approval that I was living under as a teenager. And I got very confused between God and people. And I don't think that I was led really well at that age. And I believe that specifically children, adolescents, and teenagers are the most at risk of church hurt, because they're being taught the word, but they aren't being taught how to, or they aren't being shepherded on how to actually have a relationship with God that belongs to just them. And so, what I realized as I went through this experience in college, that if this is who God is, I don't want anything to do with him. This is not a cool dude. Okay. He's mean, he's shaming, he's a guilt tripper, he's very punitive, and like he's inflexible, unaccepting. Like there's all of these things. And I was like, okay, so if that's who God is, if that's the person that y'all are telling me I need to follow and believe in, I don't want to have anything to do with him. That is not a life I want. And and so I like pushed him away. I pushed everybody away. And I, you know, I wish that I would have had better leadership in my life then. That's all I can say about that. But it's interesting because, you know, I'm going to share, what was that, 20 years later, I experienced this second round of church hurt. But what I know is true is this first church hurt pushed me away from God, but the second church hurt actually brought me closer to my relationship with him, because I had really started to, over the years, when I came back to wanting to know more about who God is to me, like it changed everything. So I preface that story so that you understand kind of where I'm coming from, because I'm not coming from a perfect relationship with God. I'm not coming from being a holier than thou Christian. I can tell you all of the things that I do wrong on a daily basis. So none of this is to impart some sort of shame-filled story. My story is filled with attempts to do right, to do good, and attempts to stick the middle finger up and say, okay, screw all of you, I don't care. Attempts to figure myself out along the way in a way where I was floundering, and then coming back to God. So I just want to, I don't know, give you an opportunity to hear my story and find some sort of inspiration in it. So there's a verse in Genesis that says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. So again, when the first church, when I felt like it kind of pushed me, the church hurt pushed me away, the second one drew me closer. So God already has a plan to use everything that happens for good in some way. That doesn't take away our pain and our suffering that we go through, but he promises this in the Bible. And so I always have to remind myself in these moments where people disappoint us, that he's not disappointing us. Like, it's the people. And those are two different like levels of relationship. So I shared with you a little bit about my upbringing. I grew up in a Nazarene church, a little more legalistic, a lot of maybe like sin-based preaching, teaching, a lot of behavioral emphasis, right versus wrong. And when I grew up, I mean, I realized later on that I learned about God before knowing who he is, before having like a real relationship with him. Like I signed my name on the line that said I was waiting to have sex until marriage. Like I was going to these youth group camps and singing and praying and crying and watching what people were doing and kind of feeling like I had to be like them. And I think I did have some like physical convictions and experiences of the Holy Spirit being with me, but like I didn't know enough for myself about all of what that was. I just knew what people told me. So like I hope that makes sense. It's like I logically knew what these things were, but I couldn't physically tell you what those experiences were like for me. So um I believe at that time my relationship with God was more so based out of fear and based out of performance. And so I got very confused. I got very confused. So I've got notes here because I want to make sure that I hit on everything. Once all that happened in college, I turned my back on, I stopped going to church. I stopped reading my Bible. I stopped thinking about God. I stopped wondering about God. I stopped talking about God. And I developed over the years many amazing friendships, a lot of people who were very intuitive, psychic, that got me into like tarot cards and using crystals and talking about the universe. And I was always kind of like grappling for some sort of like higher power grounding, but I was avoiding God at all costs because of what I went through. And so, what I truly believe is that when God feels unsafe, control feels safer. And so, I was doing anything to try and create control in my life, create predictability, create some sense of like having tangible evidence that I was making the right choices or doing the right things. And I don't believe that, like, when I was using tarot cards and crystals and getting Reiki readings and doing all these things, like, none of that was rebellion against God. It was more about me trying to find ways to feel grounded and feel like I was being led. Because I had grown up being led by the church, by the leaders of the church, I was looking for something else to lead me because I didn't have any self trust, and I didn't have trust in a higher power that was gonna like lead me, hold me accountable, and also just like love me. So this is where I think a huge gap for most Christians is that lose their relationship with God, which is that people don't leave God because they hate him. I didn't hate him. I believe that people lose God because they feel powerless, they feel ashamed, they feel unheard, and they feel unsupported. And that's exactly how I felt. I didn't want to reject God, but I did want to find some sort of relief. I did want to find some sort of grounding. And that place was very like, it was always, I don't know how to describe it other than to say, like, when you feel like you're connected to something, but you're disconnected from it, it's almost like you're emotionally numb to parts of what are happening. That's how I always felt. Like some of it felt right in the moment and it felt good and I felt in alignment, but then all of a sudden something would feel off because it wasn't ultimately like what resonated and existed in my core. I was just constantly grabbing for something that was going to help me find relief and help me to feel grounded. So I Ace, please stop licking. I love you so much, but that sound is obnoxious. So if you or somebody can relate to that piece, that you are just looking for some sort of relief, if you left your relationship with God or your religious beliefs, that's we're going to get into that later, but like because you were felt ashamed, because you were made wrong, because you were like disrespected, fingers point, whatever, I just want you to know Proverbs 3, 5 through 6 in the Bible, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Why does this matter? Because when we're trying to manage uncertainty, when we're trying to manage the discomfort that comes from betrayal, hurt, pain, we try to control the outcome so that we don't have to feel it anymore. And I feel like when I couldn't trust people, I leaned on my own understanding, and I leaned on what other people were understanding as a reference point for my groundedness, for what felt like some sort of leadership. And that, again, always left me feeling somewhat disconnected. Now, in 2 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." Why is this powerful? Because, again, I'm not seeking to rebel. I wasn't seeking to go against something. I was seeking some sort of stability, some sort of peace, and mostly a feeling of acceptance. And that story follows me throughout childhood. I just wanted to be accepted and loved for who I am. And so God already offers us a soundedness, a groundedness, but I was manufacturing it because of how disappointed and hurt I was by the people that I trusted and loved most, who told me about who God was. So I went through, after college, within my first marriage, after divorce, just fluttering around trying to, again, I felt like Alice in Wonderland, like just trying to grab at something while I fell down this dark hole. And it wasn't until 2019 I had found this woman on social media, and she was starting to talk about God, but was also still living in this kind of other spiritual realm place. And I thought, so she's like doing, tarot cards and like Enneagram readings and Ayurvedic work and body work, and she's talking about God. So like both can exist. That's interesting. Okay, cool. And so I started to kind of engage, because I was like, okay, maybe I can find this way back. But it wasn't until she hosted this group, or this like class, and I went in, and she had referenced a book, which I've already shared once, so I'm going to share with you again. But this book shifted my mindset around God, and it shifted my heart space around God, and softened me to be open to who He is. And it made me more curious about who He is. I didn't come back to religion. I didn't come back to like the Christianity piece. I came back to like wanting this relationship with God. Now, I'm going to preface this to say, and again, this is a very polarized thought, but like you can't have like tarot cards and crystals and psychics and mediums and have a Christ-centered relationship, because then, remember, you're leaning on other ways of understanding life, when the Bible tells us to lean on our understanding of what God is telling us. And so again, my like trajectory of my relationship with God has been unfolding since 2019, and it's not until I hit 41 that I really started to ground into my relationship with God. So like, as I'm telling the story, you have to understand this is like a, let's see, 2019, 2021, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So a 6-year process. Okay. And I'm still I'm not some professional in this area. I'm only sharing what I know. But this book, The Illuminata, A Return to Prayer, if you have experienced religious trauma, if you have experienced church hurt, I want you to get this book. Marianne Williamson does a great job of speaking about who God is. And I want to read something in here that she says, because it will open, I feel like it's going to open your heart and mind, like it did to me, to become more available and potentially flexible in this relationship. She says, "We are at a crossroad of two huge divergent points of view. One is materialistic and one is mystical. One is worldly and one is holy. One is based on fear of the world and one has fallen in love. I used to think I was not religious, and perhaps I was not. I didn't like what organized religion had done to the world. I still do not. I have come to see how that true religion is internal, not external. The spirit within us cannot be blamed for the blasphemies carried out in its name. What some have done in the name of religion, projecting their neuroses, even perpetuating evil on the world, does not make religion a mystical phenomenon invalid. In fact, nothing could be so relevant or so necessary in the world today as that we might carve out an inner kingdom for ourselves, dwelling there with God to be cleansed. Secularized, organized religion have become, in many cases, as calcified as other institutions that form the structure of our modern world. That's why they are accepted here and also why they are rejected. Our religious institutions have far too often become handy-maidens of the status quo, while the genuine religious experience is anything but that. True religion is by nature disruptive of what has been given birth to the eternally new within us. It is subtly revolutionary, for love by its nature is radical and ecstatic. It's a force by which we burst out from its old and calcified into a higher mode of being. The internal experience of true religion is the process by which the human beings break out of his bondage into full free spirit. Within that freedom, there is no consciousness of slavery, no respect for any structure that seeks to limit or control us. She goes on to say, there is nowhere you need to go to find God, for God is within you. There was no one you need to ask about if you are good enough, for he has already established he is exceedingly well pleased. There is no one you need to look for victory except the one who has risen within you. As he rose, he took all of us with him. His resurrection has been established. We need not seek it, but rather claim it as our own as we face the crucifixions of a cruel and bitter world. Through him, we hold the keys to triumph and transcendence. It doesn't matter what religion we are. It doesn't matter what doctrine we ascribe to. It doesn't matter what people say. What matters is that we open our inner eyes and see the beauty of the risen one in every heart and every leaf. The Christ is not a Christian concept. The Christ is a force of nature, our nature. It no more belongs to a particular group than the ocean belongs to Greenpeace. So get this book, because she really gives you permission to find the God that has been inside of you, even if you have been hurt, even if you have left, even if you're angry at him, even if people have betrayed you. He's still there. He can't stop people from peopling, but what he can do is show you what love is for himself. And so when I started to deepen that relationship with God and understand who he is for me through continuing to read the Bible, continuing to read books, listening to podcasts, I'm starting to listen to different church services online, talking to people. I started to become much more open-minded. And when I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, I finally decided I was ready to go back to church. I found myself in a church that was, 95% Black. I was a small percentage of white. And there was something about this church that felt new. It felt good. There was so much life, so much excitement. I hear now that that church is kind of known as like the club church because it's like a big party all the time, which is probably very close to the description. And there was so many layers to me going there, because it's where I felt like God told me that it was time for me to start working with the youth again. I had a private practice back in California, only working with kids and families. But when I moved out here, doing that with kids was very tough. So I started working with adults because that was a more easy access remotely to see people online. And so I was, very quickly, I heard God say that you're going to start working with the teens in the youth group. I started serving at the church. And later on, it was where I met my husband. And when I was sitting in the back pew of our church auditorium, we were sitting next to each other. We worshiped together, had no idea who each other were. Weeks later, I saw him singing on podium, and I heard God tell me that he was going to be the one I was going to marry. A few weeks after that, he friended me on Instagram, and we messaged a few times back and forth. He was going through the divorce process, just waiting for the divorce to be cleared. And so we spent time together, but we weren't dating, we weren't intimate, we were just getting to know each other as friends. And that was part of what was very important to us in our dating process, was to both do things very differently so that we didn't repeat either of our, past marriages. And so as we got to know each other, we had this beautiful relationship. And once his divorce was finalized, we began a relationship together. I had still not met his kids. That was something we weren't going to do until we got engaged and were prepared to get married. And yes, those were things that we were talking about, because neither one of us also did not want to waste our time or our energy on investing in something just for it to end because of what we both had gone through in the past. One of the biggest pieces that we talked about was making sure that we were both in lockstep with our personal relationships with God, and that every choice that we were making along the way was because of the discernment we had because of our relationship with God, along with the people in our lives who we respected and who knew both of our stories really well, would call us out on our crap, hold us accountable to what we were doing, and call us out if we were not doing something that we had said we were committed to doing. We had a lot of people praying over us, and we were quickly, once we started officially dating, in premarital counseling, in order to make sure, again, that we were doing things in a way that was going to reverence who God is and what God is telling us to do. Unfortunately, our church did not take the same sort of approach to our relationship. And my husband's pastor at the time told him that he needed to end the relationship between he and I. And at that time, it was interesting because we weren't even like dating then. We were just getting to know each other. We were just like hanging out as friends. There was no dates. And because he had not been divorced yet. So when that happened, it was a very odd experience, because it was like, well, number one, like, what are we doing that you are most concerned with? Just to say, you need to stop hanging out with Brianna. You guys need to wait 6 months before you hang out. Well, 6 months because of what? Like, what is the 6 months that you're asking us to follow? What is the 6 months that you are saying needs to happen? And so the next week was our youth group event that I like helped set up, lead, do all of the things with. And by that time, of a youth leader telling him, or his leader telling him that he needed to like stop talking to me, nobody came to me and asked like, "Hey, how are you feeling about this whole thing with E and what's going on? And how are you doing and what's going on with you? And like, tell us about this relationship." No, nobody came and checked on me at all. And the pastor's wife at the time was at the youth event, and so was E. My husband's name is E. And she went up to him and said, "So I hear you like cougars." And I thought that that was the most inappropriate thing that a leader, especially a pastor's wife, could ever say, when we're not in any sort of relationship with each other. She doesn't know me from anybody else other than what she sees. She's never gotten to know me. She knows nothing about me. And so that was like very disrespectful to me. And so then a few days later, I had shared that with a couple of people, what she had said, how I was feeling about it. And so then she gives me a call. And I could tell that she already had an agenda on the call, because no matter what I said, everything was dismissed. Nothing was actually acknowledged. It was very much, as a therapist, I know the lingo, like, "Oh, I understand how you could feel that way. I understand how you could feel that way." Like, that's the most condescending comment you could ever say. And I teach that to people who are trying to diffuse situations because they know it's not going to go anywhere. But never was there an apology for not recognizing the impact that it had on me. There was no like, "Sorry that this hurt you. That wasn't the intention." It was just, "I understand how you would feel that way." And so E and I took some time apart, not interacting or talking much, to really pray about what was happening, to see if like what we were feeling led by and what was going on was incongruent or not. And so uh when we gave it like a week and a half, we came back together and I was like, something about this does not feel right. I have learned to decipher what peace is. And I know that when I make choices now, I am praying that God lead me in a direction where I know it's Him because I'm at peace. And when I've spent time with you and when we talk and when we explore like what this might look like once you're officially divorced, like I'm at peace. All of this is taking away all of my peace. So something is wrong. Something doesn't feel right. And so, fast forward a couple more weeks, he gets officially divorced. Like, he gets the papers, it's all done. They had been separated for already a little over a year because this is what happens in the South. You have to be fully separated for a year, no relationship ties. So, he had already like distanced himself. He was just waiting for the piece of paper to say he was finally divorced. And so we go on a date, like we're kind of official now. Things are great. We're moving things forward. We're, starting to plan for like what premarital counseling will look like. Um, we get engaged and nobody knows. We've kept all of this a secret. And um, right before we got engaged, we went to like he invited me to go to some um, worship singers like get together thing. And apparently my face was in a video somewhere that got back to his pastor. And so he had another conversation with him and was like, hey, I thought I told you that you needed to end things with Brianna. And he was like, yeah, I mean, I get what you were saying, but like, I also have some discernment in this and that's not what I'm feeling led to do. And so that blew up and the pastor wanted to meet with both of us and talk to us about what was going on because I was still hurt by what happened with how the entire conversation was handled and how I was left out of it. I didn't like how we weren't brought in for any sort of like relationship coaching, any sort of actual pastoring. I don't like what the pastor's wife's comment was and how she handled the conversation with me. And so we're sitting down, which by the way, he held this meeting at a coffee shop, like a public coffee shop, which is crazy to me because we're having this very intimate personal conversation in the middle of the public. So like that was nuts in and of itself. And again, you could tell that there was already an agenda. So I was asked to share my side of the story of how I felt and what happened because he heard that I was upset by what happened. And so I clearly stated right then and there, this is part of my issue, is that there's a lot of hearsay happening, but nobody's actually coming to check on me and ask how I'm doing. It's all circling the wagon, gossipy sort of talk, but nobody's actually addressing what's going on. And so I shared everything about how I felt, my opinion on how things could have been handled differently. And his response was, thank you for sharing that. Here's our reason why we did X, Y, and Z. And I stopped him and I said, I need to interrupt you because you just did exactly what I shared my issue was. I expressed a hurt. And instead of you acknowledging, wow, I am so sorry that hurt you. Wow, I didn't realize that how we handle things hurt you that bad. Thank you for telling me. I don't even need an I'm sorry, but acknowledge that you hurt me. Like it is okay for us as human beings to never intently hurt somebody, but still hurt somebody. Like it was so benign to me. And so I shut off after that because I already knew that nothing that I said mattered. There was already an agenda, there was already a plan. And so I ended up excusing myself and leaving. I had to get back to work anyway. I was over it. He finishes his talk with E. And thank God E was very smart about this whole thing. He recorded the entire conversation and it was bad. It was very, very bad. There were comments made like, I'm your pastor. You have to submit to me. You have to do what I say. It was disgusting. So I took a break from the church and I told, the ending of that conversation was if you if you since we are not on the same page, I think we need to pray about this a little more and then maybe come together again. Within the hour, E got a call back from his pastor and he had fired him from Podium. So he was no longer employed as a worship leader at the church. I then got a call and was told that I needed to step down from my leadership position because I said that I don't trust leadership, which is not what I said. And I told him that he gaslit me because I said, those are not the words I said. I said, I felt very uncared for. Oh, that's what he said. He said, well, you said that we don't care about you. So why would it be okay for you to be a leader if you don't feel like you're being led by people who care about you? I said, that's not what I said. My comment was, I felt very uncared for in that situation. Those two things are very different. And so he fired me. He told me I needed to step down. I needed to pray about it. I needed to take a break and get my relationship right with leadership. So I called my leader for the youth group and I told him what happened. And I explained that I was gaslit because I was. None of that was handled appropriately. And so I stepped down from that leadership position and then decided to take a break from that church. Unfortunately, by the time E and I got married, he still felt like he needed to be at that church and I didn't. But I know now that as a couple, we're not going to go to separate churches and be in different places. And so I had to support him in that, which was really hard. My challenge with this experience of church hurt is there's a huge difference between correction and control. And there's a big difference between shepherding somebody and leading from ego. And there was a big discrepancy there. So what I've noticed in leadership in church, especially this one, and what I look back on in other churches is that I just want to offer some wisdom because I don't have bitterness towards this church. I don't have bitterness towards these people. I feel sad. I feel sad for how the church decided to handle both he and I. And I know we're not the only story, both as individuals and as a couple, but there is a responsibility that spiritual leaders play. And they have to care, guide, and hold people accountable, especially people in leadership like me and E, but they have to shepherd us correctly. And shepherding does not look like putting a hammer to a nail. Shepherding looks like really showing a level of curiosity and gathering understanding. Shepherding looks like actually taking us down a path, not just putting a gate up and saying that you need to wait to walk through it for 6 months. There was a lot of lack of care, and there's a lot of lack of like being very transparent and honest about why, which I found out later some of the reasoning, which they thought that we were dating straight from the beginning, which we were not, but they never asked us questions to get to know that. So I truly believe that in church experiences, titles can get inflated with ego. And when you're not being given the right leadership training, the right spiritual training, and you don't have honest leadership, then damage can cause leaders to hurt people because they're lacking the skills they need. And I truly believe that leaderships within the church require both spiritual maturity and emotional maturity. And the spiritual and emotional growth have to come from different styles of people. It can't just be from the leaders above them, like the pastors within the church. It has to be people outside who can see the gaps and who can see the holes that are missing. 1 Peter 5:2-3 says, be shepherds of God's flock, not lording over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And this directly talks about the leadership posture. Title versus shepherding, control versus care. This is really important for leaders because as leaders, we are the ones, the flock is the church or the people attending. And if I didn't have a relationship with God and I was somebody else, I could have walked out of that church saying that was a church problem. And if a church hurt me, then God hurt me. And I don't want to have anything to do with him. But again, because of my relationship, I could handle it differently because I saw them for people being poor leaders versus God hurting me. So I want to remind you that if you've been through these sort of experiences, this isn't actually church hurt. And I've been using that word up until this point to kind of keep you engaged here. But I truly believe it's not church hurt, it's people hurt. The church didn't hurt me. The church is a body of people. Who hurt me were the leaders. And that is really important for you to digest, because if you have decided that you want to be led, then you're going to church to be led. It's not the church, it's the people who hurt. So young churches, I believed, often are filled with very passionate people who care, but they're inexperienced and they're not trained properly. Older churches can have these sort of experience because often they're structured from a very like rigid point of view, with like a very old kind of point of view. And so the at the end of the day, leaders are human and humans are imperfect, so they're going to make mistakes, but God is consistent, and God can separate you from these people if you have the relationship with him to lean on. In Hebrews 12:2, it says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith." And I want you to use this as a reference, because if your faith falls apart because of people, then your faith may have been built by people. That's what happened in my first round of church hurt. I really lost my faith because my faith had been built on what people told me and what I thought I was supposed to do, because that's what I had to do. But this time around, my faith was built on who I've been getting to know God to be and who he says he is. And so I didn't lose my faith because of this. Now, did I lose my faith in leadership of people? Maybe a little bit. I had to like learn to rebuild trust there, but I didn't lose faith in who God is. And this is really important because we have to fix our eyes on God. We have to fix our eyes on Christ, so that when we are hurt, we have somebody to look to for that repair, not for the people. Now, when I was thinking about how to share this, I did some like Reddit searching, and I wanted to look for like what people who have experienced church hurt were like searching for and talking about. One of those was, how do I trust God again after church hurt? And my suggestion would be that you just start with getting to know him again, reading the Bible and understanding who he says he is, learning about the stories of how he shows up for his people and what he says. Because when we remove the voices that are teaching us, when we remove the expectation of leadership, because let's be honest, every leader is still human. So no matter how aligned they are with God, they're still going to bring their humanness into this. So that was part of my issue, was if I'm hearing Holy Spirit tell me this is the man I'm going to marry, if I am feeling at peace when I am in this experience and there is nothing in my gut telling me I'm moving too fast, doing something wrong, if we're being prayed over and all of those people praying are challenging our decisions and hearing what we have to say and then supporting us, they're not just like letting us be who we are, then I am going to start to discern, my Bible's over there, what my Bible is saying and what God is telling me before what I hear other people telling me, especially when these people do not know me, right? So this is where I encourage you, if you're rebuilding after church hurt, is to rebuild in private. Rebuild and don't rush back to community. Your Bible is going to be your largest reference anyway. So no matter what anybody says, that's going to be your consistent reference. How do I know if it was spiritual abuse? I think this is a really great pest question. I believe that spiritual abuse has more to do with fear-based tactics of control, isolating you from outside people, shaming you, using shaming language, using guilt tactics, and um, giving you correction in public in front of everyone without like privately caring for you. So this is like very extreme behaviors, like very extreme behaviors, where you're not allowed to question. Now, do I believe we weren't allowed to question? Yeah, I do. I do believe we didn't get any room to ask questions or be curious or to challenge what was happening. Like I said, there was a very, very strong agenda that was happening here. So the next question that I saw a lot of was like, how do I find a safe church? Like, how do I even know I want to go back to church? My practical advice would be to date churches and go to many different ones for a while and see what feels good to you. I would also encourage you to look at leadership. What sort of leadership are you wanting? I was a young, when I say young, like in my spiritual growth, Christian at the time. So having a young church who was hip and cool felt really good to me because it opened up the door to like be comfortable with this. But as I matured in my spirituality, I found a lot of these things to be kind of like mundane. But because I had built so many relationships there, I didn't want to lose that. But what I did know was, as somebody who has already been divorced, who has moved across the country, who has businesses of her own, who has held leadership positions, the way I was being led was very immature because of not even my age, but my own life experience. So I think it's really important for you to look for people who have either been through what you've been through or have been through more in order to be fully led in a way that's going to allow you to grow and evolve as well. Um, I would encourage you to find leaders who admit when they're doing something wrong and who call out honest BS. If you are going to a church that skirts around issues or doesn't really hit on topics, that's probably not a church for you. You want somebody who can speak the truth no matter whether they lose people or not, no matter whether they hurt feelings or not, but that they're also very, very careful in how they share it, and they're showing a level of care for the hearts of the people. That would be my encouragement. The last question was, what if church hurt made me stop believing? I think this is really big. And like I shared earlier, if your faith falls apart because of people, then your faith was only built on people and not God. So that really is condemnation, right? So I encourage you to build a life based on Christ. You can use the Bible app to start, going through devotions on building faith and what that looks like. I did that. Again, reading the Bible, start with Psalms, start with Proverbs. Those are very direction and praiseworthy places. Start with the New Testament. Go to like Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Like those are beautiful books to read that will really start to help you understand who God is. And again, read this book. Um, I I will be honest with you, like my buildup of he and, my husband and I attending this new church, like I'm very slow to warm up now. I'm being very cautious and careful of the people, but I am still listening to the word, and I am navigating, continuing to understand who God is within me, for me in my life, and what he's calling me to do. So don't rush the process. There is no hurry. God's obviously in no hurry because his timing can be slow as heck. But I will tell you that if it wasn't for having a relationship with him, I feel like I would have been in a lot darker of a place through this experience, but even more so through my health challenge, through perimenopause, through our challenges within our marriage, through this co-parenting stuff. So I do believe that God can be a strong foundation for you if you allow yourself to trust him in that process. So I really thank you for listening to this. If you listen the whole way through, I am curious about your experience and your thoughts on this. I would love to dialogue about it. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning for myself who he is. I'm still learning about God through scripture. I'm still learning about God through my faith and through who he is and how he shows up in my life. And that's what I'm here to share, is that there is life after people hurt within the church. There really is. So thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.